Ooh, stay thirsty, my friends. This is COFOH Live Undead. I am your host, Daniel Crosier, and I am joined by the amazing Tom Rasch. Whoa!
You write something on my face.
Tom, how are you, sir?
Dan, it's great to see you. And I have to tell you, since I've never seen your show before, that is an amazing intro. I love it.
Thanks. I like to get really messy, apparently.
You know what? It kind of reminded me of a little bit, that vibe, like, I don't know if it'd be in the aughts, but like when Viva La Bam was on MTV.
Oh, right.
You know, I mean, it's kind of got that sort of very rock and roll punk,
Yeah.
you know, kind of just great, that kind of visual language of what MTV was known for, especially. And I think you captured that.
Thanks. Yeah. It's a little bit safer than that because doesn't that fall along the lines of like the Jackass family?
Yeah. I mean, and I would say that I guess kind of withstanding like what the Jackass Viva La Bam thing was all about, but there's kind of still a vibe and a language on editorial style, graphics.
Yeah.
That to me, your opening definitely reminded me of, and I did recognize, by the way, Steve Niles.
Yeah.
Scrolling imagery and stuff like that. So Enigma, is that his name? The tattooed guy.
Yeah, I've got his mask right here. I think it's the same one. Or no, this was a newer one that I wore. Yeah. So I had that going on there. But we do a comic book with Enigma as well. We used to do Show Devils, and now we're coming out with a kid friendly comic as well. So we'll be launching that Kickstarter pretty soon. But Tom, speaking of Kickstarters and stuff and launching your own worlds, you're an amazing talent. You go back some years to the Marvel days and drawing for Marvel and doing game design and stuff, concept art. Tell us a little bit of where you came from and how you got into making amazing art and worlds.
Well, I always I will say this up front, because I enjoy this kind of thing, because as much as we'd like to think that we're the center of our social media universe, I know that my stuff is brand new for a ton of people. And so it's fun to kind of, I guess, fill everyone in. So I will say, for your audience out there who's never heard of me, which I'm sure there's quite a few, I drew for Marvel Comics during the kind of the big boom, especially during the 90s. And I worked on Punisher 2099 for a bit before the book was canceled. And that's when the implosion in the market happened. That was an experience, an educational one, because I think once you have a dream, and it's been a dream since I was a child, to either work in films, be a writer and director, and also draw comic books, that Marvel was the kind of crown jewel of that. And that's actually where I got my first professional comic book work, that you sort of assume, hey, I got my feet in the door, my foot in the door. And so I like to say I got my big toe in the door, and then the door shut because the market imploded right around that time. And so the editor that I was working for ended up going over to, like, one of them went over to Harris Comics, working on Vampirella. The other one ended up being in charge of the Superman line. And, there's a lot of editorial political decisions. And so I wasn't able to find much work after that. And so not too long after that, a couple of my friends in the industry had migrated over to doing concept art for video games. And they told me, they said, the money's better. You're a salaried employee. There's benefits. Nice. Most of the time you don't have to draw as long, and it's the same kind of skill set. So it took me a while, but I ended up doing that for years. And so I redesigned the Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew for these games that were in Walmart. And I worked on a number of titles that were put out by the PlayStation Network. Ironically, a lot of the games that I ended up working on were more fantasy based, like Torchlight, World of Warcraft. And then they were actually the company that I was living in San Francisco was gazillion at the time. I'm working on their fantasy stuff, and they're also doing the Marvel Heroes MMO. So there's this weird kind of, contradiction to like, I'm working on their fantasy stuff and not their comic book stuff, but which was fun for me because it kind of gave me an education of like, I guess just sort of opening up your repertoire of the kind of work you can do in designs and the characters you work on. And so I had a lot more of a kind of a crash course in doing fantasy style art and everything that goes along with that. But nice. I've also done a little bit of film work. I've worked on some film projects before, usually more indie stuff. I worked on what was supposed to be a proposed TV miniseries for a book based on famous astronaut Buzz Aldrin called Encounter at Tiber, I believe. Cool. Did some work for that. I had some of my artwork appear in the documentary about George Lucas called The People versus George. A number of things. And then I decided roughly about a decade ago, and that's when I really got heavily involved in social media on things like Facebook, and people were asking me, would you like to try and work for a company like Marvel? And I kind of remembered it's a very labor intensive field of work, especially for a person who was younger. And so I'm like, well, I'm older now. Yeah. And if I'm actually going to, I guess, try and do anything comic book related, I'm going to re-embrace one of my even earlier dreams, which is to bring my characters to life, because that's something I've been passionate about since I was in 5th grade. And so like Black Alpha is the main character that's kind of spearheaded all of that. He's the first character I created at 11 years old. It was published in USA Today. I've had merchandise from it on The Big Bang Theory. It's been optioned a few times for TV, movie, or cartoon, series development. And so, and with that, after Black Alpha, and through my teens, I started creating a number of other characters. Because like a lot of creative types, there's been a period in my life when I was younger where I was very shy, didn't have much of a life. So my imagination was on fire. I played a lot by myself, didn't have a lot of friends until I got older. And then a lot of times even in high school, I walked back and forth to school. And while I was walking, I didn't know how to drive. I didn't have a car. So we spent about half an hour walking one way, and my mind was always just churning. Yeah. An image would pop in my head, and then a character was born of that. And cool. It's been ongoing since then. So for the past number of a few decades, I have a number of these characters, all of them, with a different premise that live in my head. And that's where I kind of re-embrace the notion of like, there's such an amazing feeling to see your world, your characters, their personalities, the voices they have actually being brought to life. You kind of feel like sort of a creative birth mother. And that's really where my focus and passion is when people approach me. I mean, I still sort of market my repertoire, Marvel artist, even if I haven't currently done that in a while, just to kind of get people to take notice, right? So then they'll come to me and say, oh, who, I'm like, well, I haven't worked for Marvel in a while, but this is, it's like taking all these dreams. I wanted to work in films, draw comic books, and creating my own characters and kind of combining them into one real path for me, moving ahead and forging forward.
Yeah. Well, with that kind of brand recognition, that's a great endpoint, for any type of creative conversations. Like, hey, I used to do this for Marvel. Everybody knows Marvel nowadays. And then when it's like, yeah, this is what I'm doing now, Black Alpha. And it definitely like looking at Black Alpha and reading, the new book too, which I just got this in the mail, which, thank you, by the way. This is,
I love that, but thank you. And I appreciate the support.
Yeah. It's a fantastic, gorgeous book. And it's, such a nice little introduction to that world. And for those out there, it's a nice note of like, Star Wars, Star Trek, Green Lantern. It seems like, at least that's what I read into it is kind of, footing from, those inspirations. But coming up with Black Alpha, what was the main source of inspiration for that?
Well, I guess kind of going along the line of the history for me, like creatively and stuff. So my mom, Maggie, is an amazing artist. And when my dad was stationed in Guam, where I was around 4 or 5 years old, I started actually copying her drawings. I recognized even at a young age, my mom did some amazing work. So I started doodling, and that's kind of when my interest in drawing began. But also around the same time, my first memories of television were Batman, the old Adam West show. Yeah. The Spider-Man cartoon that has the jazzy intro theme, and Star Trek. And that was like right around the same time. It was superheroes and science fiction.
Yeah.
And I was just, smitten and never looked back. And so I suppose as I got older, just by proxy, by, inspiration, I knew I wanted to do kind of a superhero-esque type story, but I wanted it to take place in space.
Okay.
I wanted him to have a cool spaceship.
Yeah.
Even then I read, the Batmobile, the Enterprise, the Batcave, kind of being the base of operations for these characters, that I just knew that I wanted that. Now, the premise of the characters changed a lot. I always tell people the name has stayed the same. The fact that he has a cool spaceship, their cosmic adventures, his color scheme is the same. But back then he was a scientist called Dr. Adam Steele, and he had a nuclear accident and it gave him the strength of 30 men.
Okay.
And that was it. That was, but beyond that, he just magically happened to be in space with a ship.
Yeah.
And as I got older and really started kind of refining it and going back to revisit it, I was inspired by obviously things like Star Wars.
Yeah.
And also just kind of knew that and I was also being exposed to more space opera through fiction, through novels and stuff.
Right.
Dune. And I decided that I wanted to kind of at the time do an outer space retelling of the story of Moses.
Oh.
But then as time went on, I kind of decided that I'm like, as maybe as compelling that might be to a potentially an audience and me, I really wanted to kind of do a character I could relate to. So I decided to flip it, set it in the same universe where there's like a hierarchy, there's kind of a monarch or king. And instead, the character, rather than being like the son of this monarch, I decided to make him the pauper. A little bit of Three Musketeers, having someone that wants to be part of a kind of a very legendary royal guard that protects the king and the people, but he's, from poverty. And I decided that's a story that I could relate to. And, because like you said, I've always pitched it as, what if you took the Batman story, you sprinkled in Iron Man tech and dropped it off in the middle of a Star Wars like universe. But there are other elements in its DNA. There's a lot of the Peter Parker. He's an everyman who once he gets these abilities, he doesn't use them to become a hero. He uses them selfishly. And there's tragedy that happens. Yeah. Also the Three Musketeers. In fact, the name of Black Alpha ship is called the Aramis, which is after one of the Three Musketeers. So there's a little bit of a nod there. And it's just like a lot of people, there's a creative stew, but those are the kind of the forefront of at least the 4 or 5 things that I can mention. And it's grown from there. And of course, through the modern age, through technology, you can kind of create your own like merchandise. So, there's 3D printers where you can make figurines or action figures now that people custom create for you. And I decided that to kind of view things in an entrepreneurial sense, to sort of get a pitch together, but hopefully show the potential investors or anyone interested, you're going to get the majority of your revenue, like Star Wars. It doesn't come from the movies. It comes from the toys and all the merchandise. Right. And so I went that route, which was a little more kind of reverse engineered. And I've learned the hard way. At the time, maybe it wasn't the best approach, but it does help me get, I guess, heat and eyes on what you're doing, because like when I've made promotional appearances in the last 10 years, in fact, it was 10 years this last year that I started getting Black Alpha out in the public eye, in Denver, doing these conventions. And so I had these things created like a maquette. It's a 12-inch tall figurine of him. And one of those is on the Big Bang Theory set in Raj's apartment.
Nice. I remember seeing that you had it on display at one of your tables whenever we would do shows together.
Well, and I learned too, I sort of took like a little bit of a playbook out of what the movie studios have done for years. Like if you're trying to get interest in what you're promoting, an upcoming film or whatever, you have like some of these kind of sneak preview, like they have life-size replicas of characters and costume. And also when Star Wars was first coming out, I digest anything I can about the behind the scenes of things I've grown up loving, Star Trek, Star Wars. And I know with Star Wars, when they were trying to get the word out, I believe in 1976, Charles Lippincott was in charge of their marketing, and he brokered a deal with Marvel to do a comic book adaptation. But at comic conventions, or even San Diego, he went ahead and had T-shirts made and posters, a little bit of behind the scenes stuff. And I took the exact same approach and decided to do that because you yourself, I'm sure, would know this, or anyone out there. The cool thing about this age that we live in is that it gives people a more direct conduit to get their work out, right? You can do a web comic, you can use Facebook to promote your art. I know you made a film, like a short film with one of your characters. We can do that, but because of that, there's also the trying to sort of swim through the white noise. Everyone has independent comics they're wanting to do, and so I felt like in order to get any eyes on what I'm doing, besides throwing out my repertoire of history, I needed something to kind of have people come over to my table.
Right.
Say, oh, what is this? And it's worked out well. I know that the first couple of times I did comics, I was around for the Denver one, and then I did the Image Comics Expo about a month apart, and the same thing. People came over. It was the 20th anniversary of Image Comics, and they came over to ask what this was about, and so that's kind of been my approach. I still currently use that approach, and I will say this, that I was talking about the social media age, that one of the big benefits that I've really tried to have as a mantra is to not get involved on the drama on Facebook or share views on theology or politics. Mine is a total nerd-centric page, and it's really been about networking and making connections. So everything that I've had happen, with whether or not it's Black Alpha being optioned for TV, movie development, stuff being on The Big Bang Theory, being in USA Today, even currently with Salem Tusk, it's all been connections I've made on Facebook. Cool. And also even like I have these guys that are currently making a model kit of the ship. It's going to be kind of an indie garage style, but it's still cool. People that I met on Facebook that come and approach me, or screenwriters come and approach me and say, what is this? This is really cool. Nice. So I'm grateful that I guess my vision of what using social media has been about has worked for me. And I will continue to do that, because I also like to see what other people are up to and support their work. I mean, I belong to a number of independent comic groups that I'm always kind of cheerleading, because I know what that feels like. That kid in me knows what it's like to get your own material out there and try and build an audience with that. I mean, there can be a lot of uphill battles, but also just to say, I feel you, man. I feel what you people are up to. I mean, there's so much fun in creating your own worlds, and really just a kind of a real creative zing and bliss from that.
Yeah. With, creating your own world. Yeah. Like you've got, your own little, not only with Black Alpha, but you've got all these other titles that you're working on or developing. Like for instance, I believe, is it the Bondsman? Mm-hmm. Can you tell us a little bit about this character?
Yeah, the Bondsman was actually a character that I created when Image Comics was really huge, and that was kind of the aesthetic. And I still love that look. Like people kind of make fun of it now, like the really huge guns and just kind of this bombastic characters have over the top costumes, and everything is just huge. And I felt like at the time, because video games were kind of taken up, but I felt like comics were trying to compete. And since they're a static art form instead of being kinetic, I think comics had to do everything they could to kind of compete with cinema and video games. And so I'm still very much a fan of that era. And then of course the 90s was an amazing time for me. Like I loved movies like The Crow, the Terminator 2, the stuff that Image was putting out, these really cool and new characters, something I could definitely relate to. Yeah. That the Bondsman aesthetically was inspired by characters like Spawn and the Terminator and The Crow. He's this very big, mysterious character that kind of has a darkness to him. He looks like he could be a bad guy like Spawn, but he's actually, the kind of anti-hero protagonist of the story. And I didn't do much with them. I did a few drawings. I did a few comic pages many years ago, almost 30 years ago. And he's also been like my other characters. Like sometimes they sit on a shelf for a while, sitting in the corner of my brain. And then I sort of kind of, get the dust off a little bit and decide what I'm going to do with this. And so in the last 4 or 5 years, I kind of been letting people know about him and saying, this is a homage to the 90s. It was created in the 90s. And the partnership that I started with the guys at WTF Comics, and it was Jack Egan and I, who's the CEO. We'd kind of known each other for a while on Facebook. And then about a year and a half ago, he reached out to me to kind of find out what was going on. And had actually originally asked about Black Alpha. And there were some kind of issues there that we had to get sort of smoothed out. And so we started talking about the Bondsman, and he kind of thought that would be a cool one to launch. And so through time, after getting some of the issues of Black Alpha worked out, we flip-flopped and decided to make that the first crowdfunder, because that's what him and his partners came and approached me and said, we would like to partner with you. And we do a crowdfunding model and we create a partnership. And then, we build the Kickstarters and, run them for you. And that's something else that I really needed. I think that having somebody come to the table and say, let us help you get these things off the ground was really beneficial, because I kept thinking I could do it myself. And that turned into a lot of diminishing returns over the number of years that, I wasn't able to get things launched. And so they helped out with the Black Alpha Kickstarter, which was a success. It was funded, I guess inaccurately, I put 48 hours, but technically it was funded within a day. And like for anybody out there that, you're trying to do a crowdfunder, I've seen a lot of interesting products either crash and burn or just go way beyond their goal.
Yeah.
And I don't feel like there's always a really secret recipe, but so I was nervous, but I tried to learn everything that I could about getting awareness about the Kickstarter. And as Jack put it, he goes, they weren't concerned because they said, you've already kind of been building your fan base for years on something like Facebook. So that's important. Yeah. And so we're currently in production of issue 2, getting the rewards out. It's all about marketing and getting more of the word out about what you're doing. And we're going to be doing another Kickstarter for Black Alpha to get issue 3 completed. There's 4 issues in that miniseries, and that's the goal, is to get the 3 remaining issues done. But also this upcoming year, Jack is working with me on the story, and we're going to do a one-shot, kind of a mini graphic novel for the Bondsman. And we're going to go full-blown. Like I said, this is a love letter to 90s comics and everything. And like I said, anything that I've loved from that era, because anyone who's grown up in that can kind of appreciate. I mean, that was the era of goth and leather and spikes and chains. And like I said, just these really badass looking characters, that, like I said, to me, Image in that era really changed the game.
It did.
And we're still feeling kind of the ramifications from that in a lot of positive ways, but also how characters could be viewed differently. Because I always feel like Batman and anyone like him was an earlier version of a hero type that really looks like he should be the bad guy. Batman's got that Dracula motif going on and kind of the darkness, but I think it's an interesting kind of direction to go. Like I said, when the hero looks like he could be the main bad guy, and we're going to really have a lot of fun with that with the Bondsman. So
yeah, I always like the idea of making the monster the hero. So to that extension, like the Hellboys or the Spawns, they do kind of represent an anti-hero, and as dark as Batman has gotten in the last 30 some odd years too, one could argue, depending on who's writing him, he's kind of the anti-hero. Except in the comics, he's got that code. Not so much in the movies, it seems like.
Well, yeah, the one code that he kind of talks about. But yeah, even I will say this, that the one thing that the story that Jack and I are crafting is that, like those 90s style stories, there's an African-American teenage girl that's kind of having a rough personal life, and she kind of crosses paths with the Bondsman, and they form this unlikely friendship. And, that's kind of based a little bit on like John Connor and Terminator 2. Right. And also Sarah from The Crow, kind of having a bond with Eric Draven. The allegory I throw about is that it's really a girl and her monster instead of a girl and her robot. You know what I mean? So the Bondsman's a bit of the, because we're going to do a lot to keep his identity under wraps and what he's all about, and even what he looks like underneath the mask and the costume. But, that's kind of how he could be viewed, as sort of a monster in a way. And so we're exploring, or even a Frankenstein and the girl in Frankenstein, all that kind of stuff, so that's the allegory that we're going to shoot for there. And we're going to sort of have the fun, bombastic, like I said, the big, huge fights and the big, huge guns. But we want to tell a bit of a modern tale too, with some depth, like combining the sensibilities of the big 90s with also kind of the more deep characterization of what we see in stories now.
Cool. That sounds awesome. That just reminded me of like a couple of weeks ago, I rewatched the Monster Squad, and the Frankenstein monster and the little girl in there. How it's brief, but they form this delightful bond, and it's just like I love those type of stories. Again, the monster is the hero, and it's like, why not befriend a little girl? There's also a very R-rated version of that. It's a horror film called Psycho Gorman.
Okay.
And it's this intergalactic dark overlord that comes to Earth. He lost an artifact, and this little girl, who's very commanding and demanding and demoralizing too, she finds it, and she learns that she can control this dark overlord and make him do whatever she wants. And she has really dark fantasies.
I've heard of that. I've never really known what it was about. I know the title. I've heard that before, kind of tossed about. So
yeah, it's a lot of fun. It's a horror comedy. It's really, really graphic. Don't watch it with your kids, but definitely give it a shot. It's hilarious. We do have some comments coming in. Angela says, "Hello, Dan and Tom."
Hello, Angela.
And
good to hear from you.
Kyle I guess he's giving us high five machine.
Let's do it. Yeah, here we go, right there. multiple high fives.
So yeah. But yeah, Tom, you also, I didn't realize this, and you corrected me off camera, that you moved to South Dakota years ago, and
back where I grew up.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, that's fantastic. And you've got a young daughter, and your wife Trish, right?
Yeah, that's Ari's mother. Yep.
Yeah. So how's being a dad?
I've said it a number of times, and I will say this real quick. So I come from a family of 10. I'm the oldest of 10 kids, 5 boys and 5 girls. I was the only one to not have a child. And so I'm the oldest with the youngest, direct grandchild for my parents. And I remember my sisters, for years kind of lamenting for me that, a sadness. And I said, no, I'm good. I mean, I kind of helped raise a family being the oldest, but they used to tell me that it'll never be the same as kind of the experience and the emotions, everything. And so, yes, having a daughter of my own still seems like an amazing, surreal thing. And I definitely am Papa Bear. And learning, everything, trying to be sort of tough when I need to be, but it's hard, she's my one and only, and not wanting to spoil her. And also just kind of this legacy thing. I know off camera, we were talking about that I'm the subject of a documentary film called Ink for Blood. And that's what it's going to be. There's going to be a little footage of her in there. And also that's what it's about. It's kind of the legacy that you leave behind, especially for me now. My legacy before my daughter, became a part of my world and is the biggest part of it, was to sort of figure out what my legacy was going to be, the life that I wanted to live. And so it's and also, like I said, she's embraced so many things I grew up loving, like, Star Trek and anything fantastic. And, and she's actually got a Starship Enterprise plushie and Kirk and Spock she snuggles with from time to time. She's got a plushie of my Black Alpha character. And so it's just amazing to watch her just really enjoy and digest. And even, Trish, the whole time she was pregnant, she watched all the Star Trek series, from the original to Next Generation to, Deep Space Nine, Voyager. So she's kind of been indoctrinated even since she was in the womb. And the day that she was born in the hospital, we had beanies made by a friend of ours where she had a Spock one, and she had Wonder Woman and Princess Leia, and even a Black Alpha one that she had on the day of her birth, So she's already, whether or not she doesn't like it later on, I guess time will tell. But so it's almost like she can't help it. But yeah, it's an amazing feeling. And I'm hoping that the older she gets, that the lesson I want to leave behind is that dad really tried to kind of live his dreams, and sometimes it wasn't always easy. Real quick, one thing I was going to bring up again, because we're talking about the horror element. And I said earlier that it wasn't my go-to genre. I mean, I was aware of it as a kid. I used to read Fangoria magazine and things like that. I think at the time, I was sort of frightened what I thought horror was, and obviously what it really is and what it's become in my adult years has changed. So, when you're talking about my characters, I forgot to mention about the Salem Tusk movie, which begins filming in the fall of 2022. And that's, I partnered up with Bishop Stevens, who's a former WCW, WWE wrestler. He's been on The Walking Dead. He's been in shows like Chicago PD, and he's really been building his acting career for the last several years. And a group called The Advisor, which is run by James Neal Brodus is his name. And he connected Bishop and I. We instantly bonded. And I basically described Salem Tusk as an African-American Indiana Jones. He's on high adventure. And I decided to set it in more the Victorian kind of fantasy, steampunky style era, because originally it was supposed to be in the 30s. And I didn't want it to be like too much of an Indiana Jones ripoff. But as we've crafted the story and what's going to be in the movie itself, is that, I've described the premise as that him and he belongs to an organization called CI6. It's an amalgamation formed by the British government and the United States secretly. And they have a number of agents from both sides of the pond that work for them, but they go after any threat, whether or not it's Arabian sorcerers, steam-powered robots, werewolves, vampires, and so even like one of our initial stories, there's going to be kind of a witch doctor, supernatural elements. And also there's an organization run by one of their fallen agents, and he's very much of a cultist, almost like what would be trying to remember the stuff that was out back then, a little bit of Jack the Ripper, anything, and he works with a couple of dark witches that are like his accomplices. So there is going to be a slight bit of a horror element, maybe not in the forefront, but I mean, as part of the pulpy kind of fantastic. I mean, even you could say that about the Indiana Jones movies, right? Like there's always one amazing, and even like, the first one, Raiders. I mean, there's that gory, cap off to what happened with the Ark and the Nazi shoulder. That can almost be viewed as horror. So in some ways,
very much so.
Salem Tusk may emulate that a little bit, which will be kind of a fun new territory, for me to cover. So.
Yeah, it's interesting about like a genre like horror. It's one of the most malleable, genres. You can slap it into, really any category, subcategory, add on an extra mode or something. Like my favorite is, horror comedies. It's, I find it's, you get kind of the similar response. You get that laughter, and then that, that fright, and it raises, the heartbeat, and it's so absolutely delightful. I love it. Incidentally too, we also have the Salem Tusk, group trailer on deck. You want me to go ahead and give that a play?
Sure.
All right.
It's always fun to watch that.
Yeah. Do you want to set this up real quick?
This is going to be our Johnny Carson moment, right? Remember when they had have guests? It's a couple of trailers to really sort of quickly sell the concept of the world. And so there's one trailer that's sort of a quick cuts of introducing you to the characters based upon my comic book style drawings, and just gives a hint of the steampunk world. And I will say this real quick. Steampunk is also kind of splintered into a number of like genres. There's traditional steampunk, there's diesel punk, whatever punk that, fulfills like an era of like the atomic age, etc. But I also want Salem Tusk not to be traditional. Like it's got the flourishes of steampunk, but it's got some other things that hopefully will be different. And then there's a second trailer I sent you. I don't know if you'll be able to show that, but it's actually a scene to sort of show the vibe of the villains and Salem Tusk entering their lair and sort of being surprised and knocked unconscious, kind of with a cliffhanger style. So
nice, cool. We'll give this a go. Come on. Very cool.
Cool.
Oh, come on now. There we go. Oh, kind of changed the format there. So that was the concept trailer, just to use as a proof of concept, right?
Yeah, like I said, it's just to kind of give you sort of the tone of everything, and it's like I said, it's a low budget project. It's an actioner, but it's just like anything when you're trying to kind of do indie stuff. Sometimes you either come up with the funds yourself, or you're trying to raise funds, and those were designed to gain interest of what I guess kind of just to give an impression of what the world is. And like I said, those were made 3 years ago.
Up there for a second.
Oh, I'm sorry. What's that?
Oh, we kind of froze up there for a second. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah. Oh, Wi-Fi. Oh, but oh man, we are really having some technical problems, aren't we?
Well, I'm not sure. Yeah, I mean, I know we're having a bit of a snowstorm here tonight, so that could be a little bit of it too. It's hard to say.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah. There we go. Okay. Now we're a little bit smoother now for everybody that's still tuning in. Yeah. So you mentioned earlier that you're going to start filming the feature film later this year. That's really exciting. I'm really happy for you. That's super awesome. Yeah. How long do you think the production is going to be lasting?
Well, since things are at early stages, I mean, I know that generally a shoot, a film shoot can last anywhere 4 to 6 weeks.
Right.
Sometimes it can, depending upon how it's set up, can even be slightly less than that.
Mhm.
That would be my guess. I mean, and the thing I will mention is, even though it's my character and world, Bishop is the one that's really spearheading the production. He's the one that's getting the funding together, and also the people to come in and act in it, and the other aspects of it. So that's probably something I'll find out. I know that one of the questions that has been asked of me, which I think would be fun to do, is whether or not I'll have a Stan Lee style cameo in the movie.
Yeah.
And I did make a quasi joke that with my beard and my hair's pulled back, my long hair, that people are talking about an Aquaman Jason Momoa thing. So I grabbed a picture of him with like a bowler hat and saying, here's going to be my look in the Salem Tusk movie. Either an easily disposable bad guy, or we had a casting call yesterday for extras. So it could be, one of the henchmen. It could be somebody hanging out in a bar, or somebody walking down the street. It'll be interesting. But I will say this, even when the trailers were being done, for me, there was such a surreal quality to like seeing, roughly what you've had in your head for, like I said, since I was 16, I created Salem Tusk, and to see it come together for a moment in live action form with somebody playing your lead and these other characters, it was an amazing feeling. So the movie will be the next step in that for me, where it'll be interesting to see how it goes, and I will say this, that real quick, I'll kind of do a shout out, like anyone that it wants to connect with me, or I guess talk or see what I'm up to. You can look under Tom Rasch on Facebook. That's RASCH. Usually my cover photo is a picture of me with my 7 main characters that I have out in the public eye, that I will say I've been very grateful because of the opportunities that have gone on now for almost a decade with USA Today, The Big Bang Theory, but even all of my other characters have had interest from producers in Hollywood, all 7 of them.
Cool.
And there's still talks that are happening behind the scenes with some of these. They don't happen overnight. That's one thing I've had to learn the hard way. And even with Salem Tusk, like I said, we got the trailers done 3 years ago, and things finally kind of lined up this year to sort of finally get it moving forward. And I'm talking to a couple other producers about a couple of other characters, and sometimes the timing has to be right. So I feel grateful, and also, I guess, somewhat confident that my instincts are correct. Because I mean, when things don't work out, I think any of us are human, and you sometimes wonder, am I on the right path? Am I doing the right thing? Is it a delusion that my characters hopefully have some merit and quality to them? And I've gone through a lot of those honest emotions like anybody would. So I'm just sort of trying to take a lot of it day by day. My focus this year is, the movie of Salem Tusk is moving forward, and the production of Black Alpha, the comic, is moving forward. And, keeping me busy has been kind of good for me, rather than focusing on the other emotions you go through where you're like, oh, this didn't happen this time. Because I mean, that's one thing I'm reminded of daily, is that anything that blows up that we're familiar with, I don't care if it's horror, science fiction, anything that becomes a household name, The Walking Dead, Star Trek, there were so many variables that kind of allowed it to go in that direction. There's so many things that could have fallen apart. And I think it's healthy to be mindful of those things. I don't want to put that negative energy out there, but that's something I've had to learn the hard way. Like I said, Black Alpha has been optioned 3 different times by 3 different studios, and it looked like it was going to happen, and then it didn't. So that's why with Jack and John Jones and the other guys from WTF Comics, we sort of were able to get me reacquainted with the idea of, like, rather than selling a concept, because I've had people very loyal, which I'm appreciative of. Like, they thought Black Alpha sounded cool, but up until recently, there's really been like no widespread version of a story for them to digest, to decide if they are going to be a fan. And so that's been the next phase of this, is to get these comics out there through Kickstarter, to kind of get an idea of the universe. Because I mean, most of my characters I try and design with a bit of a franchisability in mind. Like, this is going to make a cool toy line, and a number of other things, video games, comic books, TV show, but Black Alpha has always been in the forefront. It's been the most developed. And
it screams, toy line and cartoon series, to me. And then seeing your artwork applied to all your others, it's like everything seems to resonate in that general direction as well.
Well, and the one thing I'm grateful for is, with the exception of Black Alpha somewhat, and another character of mine, which is a tribute to my late grandfather, it's kind of a Mexican superhero story called Marutek.
Oh, wow.
Most of my characters are not straight superhero stories. I mean, as much as I've grown up loving the superhero genre, I sort of felt like Marvel and DC have done almost it all. You know what I mean? Like, and I know you can do. I'm not discouraging anybody that wants to make their own superhero universe. for me personally, I think just by sort of a subconscious nature, I don't do straight superhero stuff. There's a bit of a sci-fi element.
Yeah.
Action adventure, supernatural, some, I'm saying they're all kind of merged. And so I feel good that most of my characters are not just full blown, knockoffs on like Spider-Man or Batman or Thor or whatever. And I'm hoping that's what sort of gives me a bit of an edge in the marketplace is that, and I always say this too, like I wear my influences very honestly on my sleeve. And so if people come up and ask what it's about, I can give you the quick elevator pitch. Well, it's this and this and this.
Mm-hmm.
I've got another character, Damian Moon, that I sort of pitch as like, Dr. Strange meets James Bond. You know what I mean? It's always like something. And I tell people, I take what I'm familiar with, what I've loved, and I sort of give it my fresh coat of paint so that it's familiar, but it's brand new. I'm always hoping that works in my benefit too. And so far, it kind of seems like it has. Like I said, every single one of those that are out on my Facebook cover photo, there's always been queries from Hollywood producers. And so it's just a matter of probably just kind of waiting and being patient and learning to balance your expectations. And, and like I said, Salem Tusk is an example of that. Like, pre 3 years ago, I never would have envisioned that something would come along that could actually turn that into a film. In fact, for a while there, as a friend and the guy and I've become friends, he was been trying to get these theme parks off the ground for them. And he wants to do a Black Alpha ride and he wants to do a Salem Tusk ride. But he's got to get his funding in place. You know what I mean? And so we've had discussions about that. So it's been really amazing to have people, like I said, come to me and say, what is this? I want to find out more. I'd kind of like to be a part of it, or I have a same thing with these writers, because that's one thing I will clarify to everybody. I'm not a writer by nature. That's not my strengths. Like you said, I'm the world builder guy. I come up with the premise. I visually design the characters and universe, and I have a general direction that I want the stories to go and a kind of an idea of personality, but overall the screenwriters, the writers give those characters their true voice. Mm-hmm. And I've had some really amazing writers partner with me too for the last 7 to 8 years that are like, I've had 3 different versions of a Black Alpha script. We got 2 different pilots, a feature film script where people have done kind of their own version. And that's amazing for me to see them sort of give each one its own unique stamp, Salem Tusk has a script not written by me, it's the same kind of thing. And so it's fun to also collaborate and sort of in a way see your world or universe brought to life as an audience member. That's one thing I'm grateful for, because if I did write them too, it would almost be kind of in a way, I'm guessing would take the fun out of it, because then I already know all the dialogue the characters are going to say, or something happens in a sequence that might be kind of planned out of my head, So anyway.
No, that's pretty cool to be able to collaborate in that level for, other people to come into your playground that you've created. And, I've seen, kind of that bibliography of designs just in like, Black Alpha over the years. It's really comprehensive and there's a lot of meat and density, even though, you yourself might not have, come up solely with the script, but I can't wait to see something, not only the film of Salem Tusk, but you're developing a comic book or a comic book series with that as well.
That's something for down the road. I think the movie will actually come out first, but that is a goal down the road. Is I'd at the very least like to do one single issue of a comic or a mini graphic novel, because originally years ago that was the idea, that Black Alpha was going to be a comic series, a mini series, a number of them, and each mini series would be representative of like a novel or a film. It's broken into 4 acts, but Salem Tusk I always wanted to do more as like either prose novels that had spot illustrations. Like the Doc Savage, the old pulp heroes that some people may not be familiar with, but I wanted to do. And so I've always envisioned Salem Tusk as like not necessarily a comic series, but more like a novel or a graphic novel. You know what I mean? So I'm hoping at some point we can get the resources together to do that, to maybe even tie in when the film is released, at some point. But it's, once again, it's a matter of juggling the resources, getting an artist. Cause I'll say again, I don't, especially at my age and being a new dad, I have nowhere near the time to draw my worlds. And actually, in a way, that's kind of where, I stay involved artistically. Like I did a variant cover of the Black Alpha stuff that just came through Kickstarter. I'm doing a variant cover for the next issue that we're currently in production. I've done all the designs of the characters. So I guess my imprint is all over it. Mm-hmm. But I also sort of, like I said, even with like the screenwriters, I enjoy seeing other artists bring this world to life. And like I said, I still get to be an audience member. Like the middle 2 variant covers there, the one that's traditional comic book and the one that's more of a Jack Kirby homage. Those are me. The first one was done with Christian Colbert. That's to the left there with kind of more the purple hue. And then the last one is done by a really good friend of mine, Blake Hendrickson. And he's been doing work for video games for years. And he's done some stuff for the DC game online. And he did that as a gift. He kind of wanted to give it more of like an 80s or 90s kind of movie poster feel to kind of make those characters feel like what they would look like in a film. Yeah. And those are the 4 variants for this version. And we'll do more for the next Kickstarter. But yeah, it's just fun to kind of see other people. I've had a number of people doing fan art of my characters. That's also an amazing feeling.
Nice.
Cool to see other people's, like I said, interpretation of your work and everything. So
it's really cool. It also kind of, gives it a little bit more density too, that, just having everybody's, having their visual stamp on your work. That's something, when I work with other artists too, it's like, I want to work with as many different artists, and get their take and their flavor on whatever my sandbox is. So it sounds like you've got a very similar aesthetic and approach.
Yeah, and I do feel like that I'm a huge believer in kind of the synergy of creatives coming together, not even physically, but in general in spirit. There's so much amazing art that can come from that. I mean, I don't sit there and minimize that someone who's able to do everything by themselves. There are artists out there that are very talented that can draw the book, can write the script, can do it as a webcomic, or can do it as their own graphic novel. More power to them. Yeah. There's some amazing work that's been created, but for me personally, I love the exchange back and forth, and the things that that kind of sort of grow from that, including the writers and everything else. Now, I will say that for me, one of the goals that I've had for years, and I've had to kind of dial that back, was I wanted to start a what I called an IP generator, where I'd have myself and creative colleagues form a studio where you're able to create ideas that become kids' books and comic books and films and games and all that stuff. And sort of kind of bounce back that energy back and forth. Hopefully I'll be able to do that someday, but we'll see if that happens. But that's partially what that was about, is to kind of bring everyone into the circle just to see what the amazing stuff, like bouncing things back and forth, ideas, collaborating, just all the really cool stuff that potentially could grow out of that. Yeah. And I hope maybe there's an opportunity where that will happen in the future, but once again, one step at a time. So, but yeah, moving forward, like I said, I'm human. I've had those days and those years where things weren't working out, and it's so easy to go, you know what? Yeah, I'm done with this stuff, and I really want to live a regular life and just do my 9 to 5, and especially as a dad, spend time with my daughter, which I still have to kind of sort of wedge that in there for me and for her too. But every time I've tried to do that, it's like a magnet. You try and toss all that stuff away, and there's Spider-Man's web hands. Yeah, it doesn't go away, and so that's always been kind of a sign to me that I'm not being honest with myself in the end. If I try and jettison this stuff that's really been for me around through almost all of my earliest memories, drawing, being creative, it's who I am. It's the number one thing that I know my purpose on this planet is to sort of keep the thread going, or put the torch to someone else, or give it to someone else to say, I've been inspired by all the things I've grown up loving. And I think it's an amazing exchange to keep that going and for future generations, because not to get overly philosophical, but if you think about culturally, like through the years, how we've developed, the number one thing that's helped us grow is the exchange of ideas, whether or not it started out with the cave drawings, any exchange through communication visually, that's what cultures are built on, is the exchange of ideas. And I feel like obviously things like film and comic books, as people have said, those are our modern mythology, like the ancient myths. And I do feel like so much goodness comes from them, like, inspiration and new ways of looking at life and new ways of looking at culture, and something that can entertain us, but also help get us through rough times. All of that to me is one big compelling, emotion and philosophy that I'm going to be a huge, champion for.
Yeah, it's, that exchange of ideas, that continuation of storytelling, and as you put it, like the creation of a, culture, it's very therapeutic. And especially during, the last couple of years, that's what a lot of creatives have delved into, and a lot of, people in general have escaped to as well, as a wonderful coping mechanism. Tom, we're almost out of time, but it has been absolutely, wonderful to reconnect with you and to talk.
Yeah, you too.
I think, hearing you, being a dad and still creating, your universe of wonderful stories and characters, and developing that into so many different mediums. I think it's very inspiring. We're going to be looking out for when Salem Tusk, the film, comes out, and then you've got your documentary. Any idea when that's going to be wrapped up and available?
Well, we're hoping that's called Ink for Blood, and it's actually a filmmaking friend of mine who we have this kind of interesting cycle of, like, he said I inspired him by creating my own characters. He had his own character. He decided to enroll in film school because he realized I'm going to have to get this done. And so my inspiration sort of begat his inspiration. And then a couple of years ago, we decided I was going to originally be his senior project from graduating film school, but it's grown into something larger than that. And so, but unfortunately, he's also had some health issues pop up over the last couple of years, and some of those have kind of flared up again. So I don't want to rush him, and that's part of the reason it has taken a while too to get it done. But roughly, if we can because we've only got a few sequences to film.
Yeah.
The idea is that because I by the way, I hadn't done cons in 5 years, and I back here in South Dakota, I was a guest at a con here in Rapid City. And so the idea is, and we film more scenes from the documentary at that con.
Cool.
And so we're going to try and do hopefully a screening of the documentary, which would be by June. And then we're going to do a Q&A with him and I afterwards, but his health comes first. So, if it's a matter of like having to film it when we can, that's what we're going to do. But we both have made a commitment to see it through. I've talked to him about, what needs to be, like, we did a sequence almost a year and a half ago where we were at a park and he filmed Trish and I playing with Aria, that kind of slice of life moment to go with the narration. So we'll see, and I've already actually had people in the film community hear about that documentary, and they said, well, when it's done, let me know. I know people in distribution. We can probably help get it, distributed. So, I mean, ideally it would be cool, like if it could end up in one of the streaming platforms, but and like I said, hopefully it inspires people too, because I feel like what I'm doing at my age is kind of unusual. Like, I'm a guy in his mid 50s that's gone through all these ups and downs in my career. It looks like things were going to blow up, and then they didn't, and then they're going to blow up. And then kind of, like I said, circling back around to the kid in me, the 5-year-old in me, the 11-year-old, the 16-year-old, to say, I'm going to make this happen. And never run out of, I guess, the gasoline or the juice to keep moving forward, keep propelling. So.
No, that's I think that's one of the things I love about you. You keep going. You don't let anything keep you down. So my hat's off to you.
Well, and by the way, once again, great to reconnect with you. We literally really haven't spoken in
years,
a number of years. So this is cool to find out you're doing this. And real quick, I want to say, I love the style that you do this in. I've done a number of podcasts now through the years. I loved your intro, like I said, and you've got a real sort of great, I love the back and forth style of your podcast. And also both of us can kind of relate as creative spirits in our history and our friendship. So that's awesome. And I wish you well on this, because I mean, that's another thing that I've considered doing, but there's no way in heck I'm committing to it with everything else I have going on. But I thought running your own podcast to me seems like a really fun thing to do. So kudos to you, and how long you said it's been on and everything. So.
Thanks. No, I appreciate it. Yeah. Tom, for everybody out there to follow you and your work, go to WTFcomicbooks.com. But where else can they find you? Facebook, like I said, it's under Tom Rasch, Rasch. Like I said, if you look at the cover photo, it's my characters, picture me with my characters. And then it's usually the actual photograph is of my daughter and myself generally. I'm also on Instagram. So if you look for Tom Rasch on Instagram, there's also WTF Instagram. There's a Black Alpha Instagram. Usually there's a Twitter also for Black Alpha. I'm not on there quite as much. I didn't quite get into the Twitter thing the way some people did, but it's there. Occasionally, announcements are shared. But and there's a Facebook page for Black Alpha. Usually my character is the bondsman. And I usually probably mainly promote on Facebook because it's such a direct interaction with, and I want the people probably I would like to view things like there's a bit of what I used to poorly call the American Idol aspect, where when people have a dream and you're with them for an entire season. Yeah. I think that's compelling. You sort of get to ride on the shoulder and have the experience of these people that are trying to make anything happen. And that's the approach I've taken with my Facebook page, because I've shared
the announcements for movie things. And sometimes, you know, I've shared some of the disappointments, but I try not to dwell on that too much because I want to give a message of hope, I guess, with everybody, with what I'm doing. It's a reminder to myself and for other people that have similar ideas. Don't let it get you down. Just keep moving forward. And so most of the time I share the positive stuff on my page. Like I said, plus if you want to nerd out, I'm always sharing the movies I'm excited for, maybe or something that I grew up loving. And yeah, it's fun. That's one thing I will say about Facebook. One of the big positives is to really connect with people more than anything.
That's cool. Tom, thanks for coming on the show. Stick around for a few minutes after we sign off.
Okay.
But I wanted to say thanks to everybody that tuned in. And, of course, to our sponsors, to our friends at Mutiny Cafe. If you're going to start a revolution, make sure you're caffeinated. And, of course, Hellfire Entertainment, thanks for rebroadcasting us on your social media. And Groovy TV, thanks for all your support. And Alien Donut Films, Bill and Angela over there, thanks for putting up with me. And then, of course, our friends, our producers, Stefan Santa Cruz and Amanda Armstrong, thanks so much for all that you do. And everybody out there, thanks for tuning in. Till next week. And also, since these are such difficult times, look out for each other. And remember to love each other. We love you. Have a good night, everybody, and take care.
Bye.